I'm David Loomis. I'm a professor of journalism at IUP, and I want to thank not only members of the Society of Professional Journalists, but also the Indiana University of Pennsylvania Journalism and Public Relations Department, the IUP Communications Media Department. They are here making all of this audible for all of us. And I also want to acknowledge that the video that they are shooting will be aired on IUP TV, and it will be posted as a podcast on the Hawkeye, the online newspaper that's published at the journalism department at IUP. I also want to thank the Indiana University of Pennsylvania Political Science Department for their support in this event, and the student co-op staff who have been very helpful in getting this event off the ground. And I thank you all for coming to this knowledge-based journalism public forum on property tax in Pennsylvania and its application in Indiana, Pennsylvania. You can read all about the issue of property tax in Pennsylvania, including some of the writings of our panelists, as well as other curated information to inform the audience about the issue that we are discussing here today. And what's different about knowledge-based journalism, the framework for this event, and regular journalism is that we try to dig deep. And our purpose is primarily to aid understanding so that solutions may flow from a broader understanding and a deeper understanding of the issue that we're discussing here today. Among the documents that you will find on the IUP SPJ website is the latest consultant's report that reviewed the 2015 property tax reassessment of the Indiana County Commissioners. And this is important, I think, for understanding the issues at hand, but one of the most important points that's made in this consultant's report, that was released on February 2nd, is that it's been 47 years since the last time Indiana County reassessed its property for tax purposes. Now, what strikes me about this issue is how long that's been. So it's 47 years, dates back to 1968. That was the last time that Indiana County did this work. And it's interesting to notice how things have changed in 47 years. Price of gasoline, 34 cents a gallon in 1968. The price of tuition and room and board at Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 1968 was $1,117, tuition and room and board. This year, 2015 to 2016, tuition and room and board is $20,700. So that's about an 18-fold increase. And what's happened to the property evaluations in Indiana, Pennsylvania? Not much in 47 years. Consequently, you might expect there will be some unhappy citizens when they are faced with the prospect of their taxes changing dramatically. This might be a good time to remind us of how property tax valuation is in the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania. Specifically, Article 8, Section 1, which means that uniformity of assessment and uniformity in tax rates is guaranteed by the Constitution. However, the half-century delay in Indiana County has produced what the consultant's report describes as, quote, massive property tax inequities. The commissioners are not the people who the consultants blame. There's blame to go around, and there's blame to go from here to Harrisburg. And here's another quote from the consultant's report to provide just a little conceptual framework. The literature on property tax systems in the United States sheds virtually no light on the reasons for such a neglectful property tax system as Pennsylvania's. Most states mandate assessments annually or on a fixed cycle of no more than 6 years. So it concludes that a business group known as the Council on State Taxation ranked Pennsylvania as having the second worst property tax system in the United States in the year 2011. Only New York's was worse. So with those preface remarks, I'd like to introduce our panelists who are here to discuss the property tax system in Pennsylvania, as well as its application to Indiana County, as well as other counties with which they have experience. They are going to speak for about 15 minutes each, and then we're going to turn the rest of this forum over to the audience for questions and answers. The microphone for which questions should be presented is at the aisle here, in the middle, the center aisle. If you have a question for our panelists, would you please approach the microphone and ask your question from that spot? Also, would you please give your name and your affiliation when you present a question to our panelists. I will moderate the event. Again, I'm David Loomis. I'd like to introduce our panelists now, and they are Brian O'Neill in the middle. He is a veteran columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He has written and spoken about the reassessment of his North Side home and his appeal of it. The process, O'Neill reported, is Kafkaesque, and he wrote, "Your odds would be better at a casino." Robert P. Strauss, on my left and the far left, is a professor at the H. John Hines School of Public Policy and Management at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Among his many writings is a newspaper piece titled "Assessment Reform Can Be Sexy." Waiting to hear from Bob Strauss on that. And finally, on the closest to me is Jeffrey Weber. He is Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at East Stroudsburg University in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. He's writing a book about the state's property tax. The working title is "Pennsylvania's Tar Baby, the Property Tax and Its Endless Reform." Each panelist will speak for about 15 minutes. We'll turn the Q&A over to you when they're done with their introductory remarks. And without further ado, we're going to begin the remarks tonight with Bob Strauss. Dr. Strauss?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Dave. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'd like to thank IUP for hosting a forum where people can exchange ideas. I came to Pennsylvania to Carnegie Mellon in 1979. I'm originally from the suburbs of Cleveland. And right away, I was asked to direct the research of a tax reform commission that Governor Thornburg initiated as he was becoming governor. He just got elected. And a couple of things were very evident. I hired a history student and learned that for the last 110 years, every 5 years, there was a tax reform study. And the number one problem area that Republicans and Democrats focused on was the assessment of real estate and its taxation. So it's kind of like the Groundhog movie. And we came up with recommendations for the reform of state, individual, and corporate tax, and reassessment, and anything dealing with the real estate tax. Appeals and assessment was rejected by Thornburg and the General Assembly. Now, Dick Thornburg ran for office on the promise that he would eliminate the school property tax. That sounds awfully familiar. And looking around the room, I see people with gray hair who would like nothing better than to not pay school property tax, especially now there's been a reassessment, and hope that the cost of public education would be paid, as Russell Long used to say, by the guy behind the tree. But that hasn't happened. I've tried periodically to convince people in Harrisburg, and as Brian probably remembers, I had an ongoing acrimonious relationship with Dan Honorado, and before that Jim Roddy, who were the county executives in Allegheny County, trying to get them to recognize that a reassessment is complicated, extremely sensitive, and politically dangerous, and that you have to devote the resources once you get to an equitable level of assessment for everybody to keep it current. But state law prohibits, doesn't require that any county assessor do anything in particular compared to their counterparts around the country. And so nature takes its course, and then the quality of assessment deteriorates. What's happened in Pennsylvania, and in some respects why we're here, is that there was a judge named Weddick, who ruled that the assessment method called base year was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court more or less upheld it, but they chickened out when it came to deciding whether their ruling should apply to all counties that had a particular level of inequity. So what that has meant is that reassessment has occurred when taxpayers and their representatives banded together and sued. This happens in a state whose legal structure, its General Assembly, its governor are hard to fathom. As many of you may know, we didn't get a state budget until recently, and it's not even clear that the school aid money has actually been distributed legally by Tom Wolf, who won by 10 points. I want to make a couple of comments because my guess is that the people who are here are mainly angry that their taxes are going up. And I'd like to lecture you that the property tax in the rest of the United States has been used successfully to support the costs of local government, especially public education, for hundreds of years. And the reason that there hasn't been a reassessment for 47 years is multi-fold. First of all, the counties in Pennsylvania do not get paid by the municipalities and school districts who get the assessment list. So the county governments and the assessors they employ don't have a particular incentive to keep assessments current. Second, once things get out of kilter, and the consultant's report talks about huge historical differences in vacant land, some at 2% of market value, others at 20%, which causes tax inequities that are extraordinary. The political reaction to this by county commissioners is to run for the door rather than try to fix it. And so, as a consequence of this Allegheny court decision, assessment reform is being administered by the judicial system. And for better or for worse, that's what's happening. And judges are, by and large, not particularly adept at managing large, politically sensitive, complicated procedures. And Judge Weddick once told me, I invited him to talk to my class after he had his decision upheld by the Supreme Court, more or less. He said, I can't talk to your class. And I said, why? I said, it's over. He said, oh no, there'll be other cases, so I have to recuse myself permanently. And so the judicial system is basically, with county commissioners terrified of changing numbers and political reaction in even numbered years, dealing with something that should be dealt with at the state level through legislation. And this is the county of Dave Reed, and Allegheny County is the county of Mike Turzai, who lead the House Republicans. And as much as both of them have said they want to fix spot assessment and they want assessment reform, and they have both approached me directly and indirectly over the years, when push comes to shove, they run the other way. So my suggestion is that those of you who are unhappy with the property tax that you're about to pay, use your appeal rights, which are limited. And second, get together and start demonstrating at the district offices of Dave Reed and Mike Turzai. You can find my opinion piece about assessment reform being politically sexy, and what it calls for is every 3-year reassessment, which every other state does, as Dave said. And once we get used to these numbers evening out and paying our fair share of local taxes, then I think your anger will subside and life will go on. So I hope I've woken you up at 5 o'clock in the evening or early afternoon by challenging you to take this in stride. The numbers are better than they were. I mean, I looked at the consultant's report. It's extremely dense. It's obtuse. Dave and I asked the county commissioners to give me the data so I could do my own analysis, and they denied the right to know request. I was fully prepared to spend a week with my students looking at the data. So the commissioners are running the other way, okay? They don't want anybody to look. And I didn't go to the company that did the assessments to get the data. And I just think that those of you who are upset about your reassessments and the tax implication should appeal your assessments, number one. And number two, get together and go sit on Dave Reed's doorstep and threaten to vote him out of office. Not because he's done a bad job, but that's the only choice you have. So those are my remarks, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Strauss. And now Dr. Jeffrey Weber from East Stroudsburg University.
Well, unlike my esteemed colleagues here who have been studying this all their life, I have not. I was originally an airborne ranger, and then when I got out of the service, I started working with the Pennsylvania Senate as a staffer and rose to the rank of the Deputy Director of the Senate Republican Policy Office. And my 12 years there, I found myself totally immersed in property taxes over and over and over again. And then when I went to become an academic with East Stroudsburg University, I found myself, I couldn't get away from it. It was like a tar baby that I was just stuck with. And no matter how far I tried to distance myself, I kept on being drawn back into it with different studies for the Center of Moral Pennsylvania. And so I finally decided I was going to start writing a book, and that's what I've been working on. And one of the things that I've discovered, the historian side of me, is that all the things that you're going through right now, that other people in the state have gone through, is not new. Back in January 30th, 1683, William Penn and 13 members of the Provisional Council, they decide to establish the first property tax in our colony. 2 weeks later, the first complaint was filed. And that first complaint was filed because of assessment. Within 3 months, they had over 100 complaints about how property was being assessed. So you see, you're in good company, a historical company that lasts for hundreds and hundreds of years. The council decided to appoint professional assessors, and they actually trained some people on how to assess property and then sent them out to go do it. That was the first idea of a reform. Many of those assessors ended up, one got tarred and feathered for his trouble of trying to assess. And so in 1692, the first major protest over property taxes occurred in our colony when several hundred landowners from the 3 existing counties at the time, Philadelphia, Bucks, and Chester, they signed a petition in the assembly listing all the problems with the property tax. Now this comes directly from the petition. So the first was a lack of uniformity in assessing property values. The second was that the property tax was not related to the owner's ability to pay. And 3, the excessiveness of the property tax was placing an undue burden on estates, specifically widows and widowers who no longer were earning income. So, don't those complaints sound familiar? It is really amazing how things haven't changed. And it goes on. We go on today. Back in the 1700s and early 1800s, the property tax became firmly established as the primary revenue source for each county. And there were 3 major reforms. 1711, they decided to elect the assessors. Assessors would run for office, and they would get elected. Now, one of the things that resulted from that is the assessors started buying their votes. I'll knock off your assessment a little bit if you vote for me. And so that typical reform didn't last beyond the Revolutionary War and ends up getting changed by 1774. 1774, they decide to establish different types of land, which, amazingly enough, we still have a lot of those different types of land. And they're used by zoning commissions, they're used by the planning commissions, and they're used by assessor's office. Different types of residential lands, agricultural land. We still have business land. We still have those types today. And that started in 1774, and they established different max values for each of them. Then in 1803, we decided as a state that we're going to keep a law. And the state government got into the game and said, you know, these assessed values differ from county to county, and even though we decentralized it down to the county level, we're going to start trying to keep a law right here at the state so we can check to make sure things are equaled out. And that started all the way back in 1803. Now, the basic school law of 1836 is our law that's responsible for tying property taxes to funding education. That's where we started having education, different school districts funded by property taxes. Now, it starts off as a balance. There were a diversified set of taxes that counties could use to help fund the schools. And property taxes was just one of them. And there was a strict limit, and it couldn't go beyond that limit. But then by 1905, there was a political economist, the forebearer to Dr. Strauss here, Edward Silverman, who, after studying property taxes in Pennsylvania, said, quote, "The property tax as actually administered is beyond all doubt one of the worst taxes known in the civilized world. It puts a premium on dishonesty and debauches the public conscience. Its retention can only be explained through ignorance or inertia." And the inertia was lack of reassessment. That they would keep the assessed values, that problems that were started by assessors who would assess values to favor friends or families they just kept on going forever, and there would be no changes. And this was the inertia he was talking about. And he, way back in 1905, was arguing with the Pennsylvania General Assembly for assessment reform and to reform the property taxes. In 1920, the school boards were authorized to set whatever tax rate they deemed appropriate, because we were in the time period of the Progressive Era, and they were trying to start all these different educational reforms, and these reforms were expensive. So they took the limit off the property tax. They said, school boards, you can set whatever rate is needed and necessary, and that will last until the Depression. And then we had occurred one of the great property tax revolts in 1932. It was a strike where people just didn't protest property taxes. They did a tax strike, and tax strikes became something that was actually rather familiar and done in several different municipalities, where residents just refused en masse to pay property tax. And officials felt they couldn't arrest everybody. And there were major strikes, and it started first in Chicago, but then it kind of swept, and there was some in New York City, there was some out in California, and there were actually some in our state right here. And so we had these different strikes, and so what ended up happening, since our unemployment was at 22.5%, and many of the properties ended up getting seized for lack of paying property taxes, the legislature decided to try to shift the burden off of property taxes. And they tried to then use other state funds to dilute it. And so a lot of the things that have been going on today, a lot of the different reforms, actually started back in the Depression era, where politicians with different governors are saying, we can take a pot of money here from the state, we can give it to the school districts, and then you can chop off some of your bill. And now decrease the amount of dependency on the property tax. Basically what happened though was it has had a small effect. It went from, during the Depression, right before the Depression, property taxes were funding about 90% of the revenues for schools, and it has decreased down to about 65%. Not that much of a decrease, but there was some. We've gone through other reforms. Dr. Strauss has mentioned some of those as we've gone on. But the gist that I came to, and one that gets right to assessment, and a study that I did for the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, when I looked specifically at assessing property and the economic effects in rural areas of not regularly reassessing property, what I found was that it actually makes the tax less efficient. And so when you impose a tax, you expect to collect a certain amount of revenue from that tax. Well, if the value of land is out of whack, so for example, in Monroe County, we haven't reassessed since 1988. My mother's property, and I can now say this unfortunately since she has passed away last year. I couldn't say why she was still alive or she'd get real mad at me. But her 10 acres of land and a nice big old house was assessed at a lower value than my wife and I, our 3-bedroom house on less than an acre of land. And because hers hadn't been reassessed, and we had bought ours in 2005. So we were paying more in property taxes than she was. And what happens is there's an inefficiency then in collecting revenue. And so we all want the tax to be fair. We want it to be equitable. We want assessments to be done properly. But the only way that that can occur is through regular, reoccurring reassessments. And technology has advanced to the point where it can actually reduce the cost of doing the assessment. And then by regular reoccurring reassessments, what happens is you're collecting the amount of revenue you're supposed to, so therefore then property tax rates don't have to continue to increase to try to drive the same revenue. This is occurring right now in Lancaster County, which does do regular reoccurring reassessments every 3 years. And they actually saw their property tax rates decline a little after they went through their second cycle of reassessment. So it's just something to think about during this. It's not an old problem. It's not a new problem. It's something that's been with us for a while. It's something that a lot of very, very intelligent people have tried to solve. No politician, you may be mad at your politicians, but let me just say this. When I was there, I could only count the bad people on one hand. Just about everyone there was trying their best, and no one comes to office and say, gee, I want to screw up, and I want to make a bunch of people mad at me. So you got a lot of good people trying to do things, trying to make the assessment process happen, trying to make the property tax part happen. It's just a very difficult issue and problem because no matter which way you turn, you upset someone. You get people mad and you spark rebellions and protests, no matter which direction you go. So it's just something to think about. We'll be able to talk about it later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weber. And now, Brian O'Neill.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when they were doing the sound check. They said, this is mic number 5, this is mic number 6, and this is mic number 9. Didn't make a lot of sense to me. Made sense to the people who put it together. This is a lot like property reassessment. You get the bill, you can't figure out where these numbers are suddenly coming from. A half century's gone by, they haven't done anything. What nobody's said here yet is what's supposed to happen is for instance, if the average assessment has gone up 80% and your assessment has gone up 30%, your property taxes should go down. By law, they're supposed to have no windfall from this. How much teeth there is in this law, and the people have to watch to make sure this is true. But if they raise the assessment by 80% on everybody, they're supposed to knock down the tax rate by a comparable amount so that the money that comes in total will be roughly the same. A lot of people don't realize that when they get their first assessment. I notice people writing down the idea of a tax strike. I can understand why that's appealing. I'll tell you, for my own personal experience, I live on the north side of Pittsburgh. If you ever been to a Pirates game, if you walked up the hill from PNC Park and you went about a block past the Modern Cafe and you made a right, you'd be on my street. And when I bought that house, this 3-story row house in 1990, everybody who grew up in Pittsburgh told me I was crazy, you shouldn't buy this house, you'll never get your money back out of it. But I grew up on Long Island, and to have a 3-story row house for the same price my brother had just paid for some crummy condo on Long Island, I was going for it. And now, people have caught on 25 years later, and the homes that you used to be able to put on your credit card are now going for $300,000, $400,000. So my assessment, which I had been assessed as if it were a slum, long after it stopped being a slum, I was still assessed at like $40,000. So my assessment has more than quintupled, which is a shock. What they're supposed to do is make it fair. And every place I've ever looked at, they've been unable to make it fair. This is now, I hear, going on for 400 years. America's largest full-time legislature, it is America's largest full-time state legislature, by the way. Bigger than New York's, bigger than California's. Never gets blamed for this. Politicians, as good as they might be, will never do anything if they're not getting blamed for the problem. So the state legislature is not getting blamed for this problem. Your county commissioners likely are. It's bigger than that. And it takes forever to fix it. It is, these fellows would say, fixable. But I've yet to see it done right. When I went in for my appeal in 2007, I gathered the assessments of my neighbors, figuring that would be relevant. Since their houses were pretty much like mine, these are row houses. And I showed in the little room, I still have a CD of this. Britney Spears has nothing to worry about. Nobody would want this CD but me. It was Kafkaesque, as Mr. Loomis said. They did not want to hear what my neighbors were assessed at. They were only interested in recent sales. So consequently, the earlier you bought your home, the less it would be assessed, which is extraordinarily unfair. Why anybody would want to buy in a city that did things this way, I don't know. But there was one group of 3 row houses down the street from me. One was twice the assessment of the other, and the other was 1.5 times that assessment. And they were identical, and I'd been in all 3 homes. They were built at the same time. And I brought this up to them, and they did not care. It's only about recent sales, at least in Allegheny County. And so in 2013, there were more than 100,000 appeals in Allegheny County, which is, I think, more properties than there are in Indiana County. And it's still going on. In the front page of today's paper, today's Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Pittsburgh puts on hold appeals of property tax assessments. What can happen, and what does happen, and what makes this so hard to understand, is the county does the assessment, but then the local municipalities are getting the money, and they're very interested in making sure these assessments are right and as high as they can be. So the school districts can appeal to get it higher. The city can appeal to get it higher. In Allegheny County, there are 173 taxing bodies. There's 42 school districts. There's 130 municipalities. This is a county with more police departments than Montana. It is a very fragmented place. I don't think it's that bad in Indiana County. I don't know a lot about Indiana County. But consequently, there's diverging interests. What happened here with Pittsburgh is the mayor or the city government started assessing in this neighborhood near me, the Mexican War Streets, where like my neighborhood, it's much more desirable than it used to be, and they're jacking up the prices. And he was getting a lot of calls. He wants to be reelected. He's put a moratorium on it until he can figure this out. In the meantime, the school district, however, has said they're going to continue appealing the assessments they think are low. So it's hard to get your handle around this. I think if it were fair, if it were made fair, if they did a better job, if you knew that you were being assessed like your neighbors, there would be a lot less animosity. You know, I had to admit in my appeal, I didn't have to admit, but I did admit that the assessment was still lower than I would sell my house for. But I wanted one of the incorrect numbers like my neighbors had, which were better numbers, and my taxes would go down. They didn't buy that. But what is supposed to happen is these appeals. These appeals are part of the process. But that also changes the equation. Because what I was saying before, if the assessments go up by 80%, they're supposed to cut the tax rate by 80% so it's even. But what happens during these appeals, and Mr. Strauss did a lot with this while it was happening, he was saying, and you can jump in if I'm wrong, that the county tax rate was too high, that the assessments had gone up so much that the county tax rate was too high. The county said, no, it's not. After the appeals, they're going to go down. So that did happen. And unfortunately, if you've lost your appeal, every time the appeals take the assessed value down all around you, your tax rate goes up. Because after the appeals in Allegheny County, like I said, there were 100,000 appeals. Billions of dollars were taken off in the assessed value, which was great for those people. But it wasn't so great if you were waiting around for it to end and you've already lost your appeal because you were counting on, the millage rate going down by X amount, and every time these appeals came in, the rate would have to go up to get the same amount of money, if you're following this. And, there's no easy answer to this, but what does happen is that the big commercial property owners get better lawyers, and they're more likely to win their appeals. And so the malls and the skyscrapers in Allegheny County, their appeals brought their numbers crashing down by a far greater percentage than the homeowners did. Now, there's ways to mitigate this. Is there a homestead exemption in Indiana County? There is. Okay, that's a very good thing. You might want to get your legislators to try and kick that up a little. The good thing about a homestead exemption is it's flat. So if you're really honestly worried about people being put out of their homes, most of the time they have a less dear property. So if you're getting $15,000 off a $60,000 house, that's a big deal. If you're getting $15,000 off a $400,000 property, it's less of a big deal. But these are the problems, and I'm hearing, and I'm sure we'll hear more in the question and answer about getting rid of the property tax altogether, which, while appealing, if I can use that word, it's really my mother. I'm Irish. My mother had this expression when I was a kid: "You want a punch in the mouth or the teeth." Now she never hit me, but the idea was there's no way out of this. You're going to be punished, and that's the way it is with these taxes. This idea. And I was reading very little about this, but I was reading about the alternative, getting rid of it altogether and kicking up the sales tax and the income tax. It was described in the literature as a modest increase in the state income tax. It's a 41% increase in the state income tax. If you made $100,000 and you were paying $3,000, you'd be paying $4,300, and you'd be paying more in sales tax on more things. So, maybe that's the way we ought to go. I'm not saying one way or the other, but be careful what you wish for, is what I'm saying.
I'd like to jump in a couple of comments. First of all, the property tax, among all taxes that are levied in the United States, federal, state, local, is the only one that's self-reinforcing in the sense that, in principle, you can see what your neighbor's paying. That's not true of the income tax, the earned income tax, the income tax at the state or federal level. And I was sitting here listening to the other panelists and trying to think, well, what is, they're probably aspire to from the county commissioners here, they're not here per se, but are you aspire or a commissioner?
Yes.
Whatever. Okay. One of the things that I did that Brian in Allegheny County commented on in at least one of his columns was I put out on a website the old and new assessments so that people could look and they could search by name, by address, and you can see what your neighbor's paying. The old history of the property tax, going way back, was that it was in New England levied by churches, and they would put the list of taxpayers, of property owners and their animals and land on the front door of the church so that when everybody came to church on Sunday, they could see what the hell was going on with the reassessment and the valuation. Given that I was, and Dave and I were refused access to the data for whatever reasons, I still think that it's probable and legal and important for elected officials in this county, the commissioners, to put up a website so that everybody can see what's going on. Now, you don't have the right under state law to go complain to your neighbor about your neighbor's assessment, but at least you can see, and that will give some transparency to what is a murky process. And I think that the technology is really inexpensive. You can do it for a couple $1,000 or $20,000. You can, and people will see before the 47-year-old numbers, the new numbers. They can sort it by street or whatever, and you can start to get an idea. And it'll be a lot more transparent than the consultant's report, which was written in statistical ease. So that's just a suggestion. The other thing is, and this is actually in the opinion piece that I wrote in the Inquirer, and this will kick off the questions. The reason that I think that reassessment is a sexy topic is because just like sex, you get better at it the more you do it. And the Inquirer printed that, by the way.
The floor is open for questions.
I won't forget that, no.
So, we have any questions from the floor? Yes, sir. Please announce your name and your affiliation. Thank you.
While people are thinking of their questions, I can comment a little bit on the question that you just asked or comment. I'm Tim Barr. I'm sure a lot of folks know me here. I'm with Evaluator Services and Technology. We assisted the county with the reassessment. And I am joined by two of the county commissioners who are brave enough and have been throughout this to do things like make the information available. So actually, the day the notices were mailed, the property owners could look at every property in the county. They could see all the neighbors' values. And on the bottom of every change notice, and for the very reasons that Dr. Strauss said, I believe this is important, you have to tell people what the tax impact is going to be. It's an 80% change in Allegheny County. Here, it was an 8 times factor.
800.
So the millage rates have to come down 8 times. That's the average change. Vacant land went up from 2% to present day 100% values. That's not an 8 times increase. Larger tracts of land got hit the big way, and no one was in clean and green in Indiana County prior to this. So making that information available has been crucial and critical, and the kind of things that you did on the website in Allegheny were actually part of the contract here, that from the very beginning when the notices were first sent out, that was something that property owners could do. You should be able to have uniformity of like properties in your neighbors. The sales matter, but also that constitutional uniformity that you spoke to is the basis of everything that you do with this. We need assessments to be uniform if we're going to have them as a basis of funding local government. The process of reassessment in Indiana County, ironically, is not quite finished yet, because the judge has extended the certification that normally happens in November. We're better than Allegheny, who sends out, pardon me, they send out bills before they've even finished with the appeals. Here, you're supposed to certify in November. That's been moved back till the end of May. That's why there's no data yet. We don't know the final results of what all the values are going to be. And as I spoke with Dr. Loomis yesterday, I'll help you with whatever data you want to crunch. The county is willing to provide all of that. They just need to finish what the court order is and get past that May 25th date so that those final millage rates are actually released through official channels and from the county. So I'll be happy to chat with you afterwards.
Okay, but just in the interest of the audience, are you saying that you have a website that anybody can go to now and look at the old assessment and the new assessment for every property in Indiana County?
Yes, sir. Residents of the county using the website and password that's on their parcel can view their own information, and from that they can search the entire county. Many, many thousands did. If they don't have internet access at home, there were computers set up out at the mall. I think they might still be.
Okay, well, when I did this for Allegheny County, there was no password protection. Anybody in the world could look.
Okay.
Now, that's additional heat, I understand, but that's why the two foundations that ponied up the money.
Well, part of that was because the website also allows property owners to comment securely about things that are wrong with their property, and that way you know that it's really the property owner that's making those notes about the property. But they did not need a password if they came to one of the county offices where that information was also available.
Well, I think all property owners here should be encouraged. The gentleman has put the county on record that your neighbor's assessments matter, and yours should not be out of whack with your neighbors. That's better than what we have in Allegheny County, I can tell you that right now. That's the promise, and that's what they will have to do. It's been said in a public forum.
More questions? Questions from the audience?
Hi, my name is Anthony Petricelli. I'm from Jersey. So this whole problem is not familiar to me at all. In Jersey, the taxman comes around, knocks on your door, says, "Can I come in?" Let them in, and they measure things.
Let them in?
Yeah, you let them in, and they come, they measure.
You don't have to, I got
Yeah.
news for you.
Yeah, I know, but they come around and all that. So it's not really a problem. We have a I believe it's 2.3% property tax in New Jersey where I come from, so it's very high. But my question is, so I have the numbers here real quick of the property taxes in Pennsylvania. So they've been going down a lot. In 2008, the total revenue's been going down, was $58 million for property taxes, and this year it is $38 million.
For which
No,
jurisdiction?
I'm sorry, 2012 it was,
What jurisdiction is that for? Because there's billions of dollars of property taxes collected throughout the state.
well, this is for Pennsylvania.
No, Pennsylvania is a state with 67 counties.
Okay.
We're in one of them.
Well, my question for you basically is, what is the importance of the property tax in your opinion? Because I know a lot of the money goes towards school and education and different public services.
Yeah. So here's some sort of broad numbers. Nationally, the local real estate tax funds 95% of local school district tax revenues. Okay, Pennsylvania has an earned income tax of 1 to 1.5%, but the property tax is probably around 80% of local school spending throughout the state. In Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, it's lower because the wage tax is quite high. In Pittsburgh, it's 3%, in Philly, it's more. But school districts, which are your largest spender of local monies, depend on the property tax, and the stability of the assessments in the aggregate provides a revenue stream for the local share of schools. Now, in Pennsylvania, about 35% of total school spending comes from the state, and 65% from local sources.
Okay.
And it varies a lot.
So I guess my question is, so the reassessment's being done, and it's assumed that the values would go up, so there would be more revenue in taxes.
No. Just as Brian said, under state law, the reassessment has to be essentially revenue neutral, which means that the county government, the school districts, and the municipalities, when they get the new 100% of market value numbers, have to pass a millage, which is much lower, okay? And so we're in the midst of that process now.
So there wouldn't be an effect on the...
There's really, in the aggregate, no windfall, but because it's been almost half a century, vacant land was way underassessed at 2% of market value, and it's being brought up. But there are examples of vacant land being assessed at 20%, and so they're going to be brought down. So there's this huge variation in who is paying taxes. And if I were to do a survey in this room, I would bet that the people whose tax bills net are going up are here, and the people who are overassessed relatively are not here because their taxes are going down. They've done the arithmetic. Okay. But the variation, when you've got 47 years of no action, is unbelievable. Okay. So it's just remember, it's like sex. If you go through and you reassess every couple of years, the variation in the inequities through the appeals process and conflict adjudication will even out. If the commissioners can take the heat and the public is understanding, if the process is transparent enough, you can have a workable system. Allegheny County is very similar to Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is. Okay? It's gone through the same ups and downs. But in Ohio, assessment law, the state role, the financing of the reassessment process, the mandating of an assessment cycle, Ohio figured it out. Okay? Remember, Ohio was a territory, we were an original colony. And what that historical review should remind you of is that William Penn didn't get everything right, and neither did Ben Franklin. So we're county by county, judges telling us what to do, and people who were way underassessed are finding that they owe money that they didn't owe before. The question for everybody who's in the room and not in the room is, do you believe that you should pay for local services? Okay? And those of you, this is going to be very provocative, those of you who say, let's get rid of the property tax and go to an income tax and raise the rate dramatically, are trying to tell young working people that because retirement income is not taxed in Pennsylvania, we're one of 4 states, they want a complete free ride. And I'm over 65, and I don't buy that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir, your name and affiliation, please.
I guess my name is Tim Wood. I'm just a resident. I live right here in Indiana, PA.
Thank you.
I didn't know anything about reassessments until I got a letter on July 3rd. And that's when I started to do research and found out a lot of things that were wrong at the state. You guys are right. It is a state issue. And you talked about transparency, and you said you're correct. Ohio does have it right, and that's because they follow the rules of the IAAO regulations.
Right.
And in this state,
International Association of
Yes.
Assessing Officers.
yes, and
Professional
many states follow the rules.
And they
But-
embedded in state law.
Yes, PA does not have them in regulatory or statutory rules, meaning, folks, they don't exist in this state. Okay? So that's where the problem resides. And that's where I found the problem resides. I did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, talked to legislators. They told me it was an empty parking lot with no parking lines. So you could park wherever you wanted. I thought that was pretty interesting. But I would like to know one thing. If you do taxes fair, wouldn't you think the formula, how the computer derives the figure, should be blatantly seen for everyone to see?
Yeah, no, so in areas where you have,
Shake your head yes.
okay, so a little bit of assessment methodology. There's 3 ways to come up with an assessment. In the case of residences where you have a lot of transactions and you have arm's length sales prices, you can use statistical modeling to get results. In a county like Indiana where you've got rural and semi-urban and some small cities, it's a little more complicated. You don't have a lot of sales. You can do the best you can. In the case of commercial and industrial, you can look at the original cost. You can look at depreciated cost. In the case of apartment buildings, things that generate income, you can look at the income stream and basically turn that into an estimate of the value of the property. For things to work well, the state law has to define clearly what value means. And if you look carefully at what we do and what other states do, that's the beginning of a whole host of problems that the legislature doesn't want to touch. Because there's all sorts of court decisions that are dependent on decisions going back to the 20th and 19th century. It's just this historical phenomenon.
Can I ask you a question? In Ohio, do they have more law cases on reassessments, or is PA just overwhelmed with assessment appeals and lots of needing to hire lawyers and attorneys and CPAs?
So once you have routine reassessment, the variability and the conflict is going to go down, okay? But there are a bunch of ingredients that are necessary for reassessment to work. One is that you don't allow spot assessments that Pennsylvania does. Now let me explain what spot assessment means, and that's what Brian was living with. We allow the taxing jurisdictions to appeal. Not all states do that. So if there's a sale, then that sale price can be used by a school district, county, or municipality as the basis for an appeal. And what Bill Peduto just decided to do in Pittsburgh was to say, we're not going to do spot assessments now for some people, which is incredibly crazy and stupid because his decision itself was discriminatory and it's not going to stand up in a court of law. But in Ohio, the financing of the reassessments is not a local matter. The state government and the state assessment law sets aside a couple of mills on the taxable value of every county and puts it into the assessing office, okay? And so the assessors in Ohio are independent, and they don't benefit as the counties do here, because they're called county auditors. And in Maryland, it got so bad, there was so much conflict over local assessments and corruption in the case of commercial properties, that the legislature said, to hell with this, and the state revenue department took over the assessment function. And that's one of the few states in the union where you just have state assessment of real estate. And people trust the state revenue department a lot more than they did their local county assessors. So you can look around the country and you can see change, you can see standards, you can see professionals talking about how to do a better job. But here in Pennsylvania, you just can't get any traction. And the fiasco we have with the state budget, the fiasco we have with the Attorney General, the fiasco we have with Supreme Court judges being forced to resign is emblematic that our governmental process has got problems. So my suggestion is that you've got two commissioners here. They get all this stuff up on the web, free, no passwords, nothing. And those of you who are concerned, start looking. And everybody will learn. The second thing is that they've got to keep doing what they started, even though it was judicially initiated. And they've got to do it every 3 years, and they've got to spend some money to do it. And Dave Reed should be sat on so that the state starts ponying up some money and providing some oversight. I mean, you can't have it both ways if you're in leadership. Leaders lead, they make decisions, they take the heat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Your name?
Frank Moore. Yes, I've been a taxpayer for the last 60 years in Indiana County. One of the points that I wanted to make sure that they understand, you said it's income neutral. That's for 1 year. Am I correct?
Yeah.
In other
Whether
words,
they're allowed to,
They can get
they
it.
have to do it in a separate vote. They can't use the,
They can't, yeah.
yeah, they can't jack it up. They can't just use it in like, I think there's like a 5% limit on an annual increase, 10%?
Right, and they can also go to the State Department of Education in the case of school districts to get a waiver.
one of our former commissioners told me, he said a lot of these people were excited because theirs didn't go up on someone in the Lord, but he said, wait for 1 year. When the school boards get a hold of it, they're going to put it up. And that, I just want to make the other point that it's not the commissioner's fault. In my opinion, it's the school district's fault. They keep spending, and we have to keep paying. I just want to tell you, I was county treasurer of Indiana County when we had the last assessment. I happened to serve in the state legislature in the 70s, so we've been kicking the can down the road ever since. But two questions that I have. What law tells us that we have to do a reassessment? Is there such a law?
Okay.
There's, yeah, if I could just, there are 6 different laws dealing with reassessment. It depends on the class of county that is involved, and that is one of the problems because Allegheny is under a different set of law than Indiana for assessment, and Lancaster County is under a different set of laws than Monroe County is, and so that becomes one of the difficulties in this state. And one of the recommendations on one of the reports that I had was about consolidating to make it similar to what was being said, an independent process, and consolidating that assessment law into a uniform standard. Now, in terms of when they talk about revenue neutral, and depending on the class of county that you're in, there is allowable up to a 2% increase, so it's not perfectly revenue neutral. But that, talking about that in the aggregate, so that's in the whole. Typically, on most reassessment, just a real basic rule of thumb, if it's been a 20-year period or longer on reassessment, 1/3 of the property is going to experience some sort of an increase, 1/3 is going to experience a decrease and 1/3 is going to stay even.
So you're saying they have to do it within 20 years?
What I'm saying is, for regular reoccurring assessment, to make it fair, to make it equitable, it should occur every 3 to 4 years. Once you start getting beyond that part, what I found was the inefficiencies increased to the point where you're not collecting the amount of tax revenue you could possibly collect, and so therefore you end up having to increase the millages to drive the amount of revenue that
You're not saying that each county has to do it every 3 years? The
They
reassessment?
should do a reassessment about every 3 years.
Most-
So they have to hire a company like we just hired?
Well, if the commissioners want, they can buy the technology and the data and then maintain it through a little bit larger staff.
And it can be done in-house?
It could be done in-house. You're talking maybe $3, $5, $6 per parcel once you get a clean data set. The hardest problem of a reassessment is getting a database that's correct. Because when you have things go for 47 years, parcels get subdivided, people forget to file new claims of title change and the like. And so there's a huge record-keeping problem that needs to be corrected.
Now, we're losing our power already.
I'm trying to shed light on this.
Well, get more money coming in. Well, I was just confused on the fact that we had to hire this big company and pay them $2.5, $3 million. We have a tax claim bureau in Indiana County, and my concern is, why can't they keep this thing up to date?
Well-
You and I know that a fair value is when a buyer and a seller agrees.
Correct.
And it's my opinion that most every property, not every, but 60% of the properties in the last 10 years probably changed hands. And that's a true value. And the question is, why do we have to have a big company come in here at this cost in order to do that?
Well, it's up, remember what I said earlier. The school districts and the municipalities get their tax rolls free of charge. And so the county government doesn't have much of an incentive to keep current the data. In other states, state government ponies up some of the cost. I have recommended many, many times, and Pennsylvania has run away from the idea of ponying up money because it costs. But fairness is something we ought to be willing to pay for. That's the way I think about it.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman brought up a good point, that they can still raise the tax rate, but they can do that whether there was an assessment or not. I mean, you always have to watch your elected officials and make sure that they're voting the way you want them to, and if they're raising the rates beyond what you want them to be, whether there's an assessment or not, you can vote them out of office. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
We did do that.
My name is Kathy Balchick, and when this all started, there was an article in the Gazette paper stating that 1/3 would go up, 1/3 would go down, and 1/3 would stay the same. And it would be revenue neutral, and this assessment was needed so the millage would go to the floor rate. So now we're going through the appeal process. There have been quite a few that were lowered. So where's the balance going to be? Is the millage still going to the floor, or is it going to be up higher?
The rate will have to be higher, not higher than it is now, but higher than it might have been if the appeals weren't successful. I mean, it's always a balance. If the overall value of all the property in the county is going down, then the rate has to go up. But always the law says that the result should be revenue neutrality.
So let me give an example of what happened in Allegheny County, because Brian described the process by which the county executive, which is our commissioner level stuff, came up with a new millage that was considerably lower because we went from 25 to 100% of market value. and then Allegheny County reassessed because of the corridor. Okay. So Honorado came in with a lower millage, and he got into a big fight with Chelsea Wagner, who is the treasurer. No, the controller.
Fitzgerald.
Yeah, Fitzgerald got into a fight with the county auditor about what the right number was. And he got egg on his face, because what he did was he lowered the rate. The appeals came in, and they were 100,000 out of 500,000 properties. I mean, it was like everybody was appealing, and the lawyers had a great day. So what happened was they had to raise millage above what Fitzgerald had recommended. He was very embarrassed. But so
It was actually the mayor who had to raise
it was Paduta.
Yeah, Paduta did. Well, at Reagan'sville, yeah.
So there's going to be a seesaw, okay? And the other thing you should know is that there will be there are appeals going on now, and then there'll be new assessments that get certified. But that doesn't stop people from appealing next year, or the jurisdictions, the school districts, the municipalities. And that's going to cause, again, some variability in the millage. What's important is that the aggregates, the taxable value for each of the townships, the boroughs, the school districts, be displayed on the county website so that you can see what's happened. And that's what I did in Allegheny County. I had it for all the 130 municipalities and 42 school districts. But some of the jurisdictions just took the windfalls and hoped that nobody would notice. And there's no enforcement mechanism from the state or the courts to make sure that the millage gets rolled back. So all of you have to be vigilant.
Right, that's the most important thing. Know what
And
the
you
law
gotta
is.
have the data.
Yeah,
So it's up to them to put it out there.
So once they decide this year what the millage rate's going to be, who has the authority to raise it in 1 year? Or does it go to public vote?
Well,
there's the limit, maybe it's different in Allegheny County. In Allegheny County, I believe the limit's 5%. Somebody said it's 10% here. But it has to be a separate vote. They can't,
By who?
by the commissioners or the school board members or the municipality or who's ever doing it. They can't just they can't get a windfall from the assessment itself. They have to have, after it's all done and the smoke is cleared, if they want more money, just as if they want more money when there was never an assessment, they'd have to have a vote and raise the rate.
there has to be a record vote.
With the appeals process, when EST did their first go-around, they went and sent off the appraisers and gave everybody their bad news or good news. And I was told by one of the panelists yesterday in regard to appraisals being done for the appeals process are all subjective. So if they are all subjective, how could EST come through, or anybody in the appraiser profession come through with good information to put on the tax books?
Okay, so when you go through a reappraisal, first thing you got to do is be sure that you have the land identified. Then you have to have the improvements identified, and that the characteristics that I think were mailed out to everybody, you've got so many bedrooms, so many bathrooms, that has to be accurate. Okay, then the condition of the house, the nature of the construction, is there a garage, is there a basement? All of these factors go into the statistical modeling of trying to figure out what a house is worth from arm's length sales. Okay? Then there's other issues, which is the quality of the services, the safety of the neighborhood, amenities. And what a professional appraiser is supposed to do is use statistics and judgment to come up with information about that. If you're appealing your assessment, you should get information about comparable properties that have sold near
The
you.
appraiser already did that,
Yeah.
and the appraiser was turned in subjective nature. And then I was also told there are 4 parcels involved, 2 are landlocked, and since there's one current owner, the value of the 2 landlocks shouldn't be reduced because there's only one owner, with the other 2 parcels having access to a highway.
And that affects you, okay. So from your perspective of trying to get a fair assessment, you can hire a professional appraiser who...
I did.
And you did, and it was the same kind of person who a bank would
Yes.
direct you to if you were buying new property?
Yes.
Okay.
And the landlocked parcels, all of the parcels were done independently as separate appraisals, and they should be viewed separately. But the panelists are not seeing it that way.
And by the panelists, you mean the appeals?
Yes.
The appeals panel. Okay. So ultimately, if you don't like what's transpired through the appeals process in the administration of the real estate tax assessment process, your next step is to go into court
Yes.
and go to the Court of Common Pleas
Yes.
in Indiana County.
We have a date.
Okay, you have a date. Okay, and the other side may or may not show up, and you'll have to spend some money.
Yes, we have already spent a lot of money,
Yeah.
which I think is really unfair.
Well, part of the problem is that it's been 47 years. Okay?
That it shouldn't be up to the property owners to correct errors that were made. Okay? That's where I have a problem seeing it.
Well, then-
there's no formula to be seen.
yeah.
Speaking to that issue, I called Allegheny County today to see about recent appeals. I mentioned in 2013, they've done about 100,000 appeals, or had 100,000 appeals in the course of a year. In 2014, they were down to 5,500 appeals. Close to 2,500 of them, or about 44%, saw a decrease after they appealed. Last year, in 2015, it dropped again to 3,300 appeals. About 1,300 got a decrease. That's 43%. There was an unlucky few, 1/2 of 1% saw their assessment go up after an appeal. I wouldn't want to be in the room when that happened, but that doesn't happen very often. Yes, sir, you've been patient.
Hi, my name's Tony Edelredo, small business owner in Indiana, and also I'm running for state senator for the 41st district. And I just want to comment that about a month ago, I went to a meeting, it was an Indiana County Landowners Association meeting. And we had 4 politicians, local politicians, sitting in front like you are now, explaining why they were asked questions, and they explained why they couldn't get anything done, why there's no answers anywhere. And for 3 hours, we went through this, with this listened question and answer, we listened to what was going on. And then there was a 5-minute break. There was over 100 people there. 5-minute break, and probably 85 people left. Might have been 15 or 20 of us still left there. And these 2 gentlemen came in and did a presentation, and I think you guys know about Bill 76. And everybody's jaws dropped while they were talking. It just seemed like it made so much sense. And with all the problems and all the unfairness with this property tax and all the complications, this Bill 76 really seemed to make sense. And I know that you guys were, you're looking at like, be careful what you wish for. But it just seems like it would be so much easier for everybody if they just got rid of the property tax and then they just worked with this Bill 76 to make it the right thing to do. And I just want to get your take on what you think of that Bill 76, and if you talk to those gentlemen or the people that put that together.
I have not talked to those people. And I'm not saying emphatically that it's a bad idea or a good idea. I would just say you got to really kick the tires on an idea like this, because, for instance, as I read this bill, without property taxes, you know, a mall would pay no property taxes. When the mall pays property taxes, that helps me. Under Bill 76, as I read it, I'll be paying more in sales tax for more things at the mall, while the mall doesn't pay any property taxes at all. Same thing with the skyscrapers in downtown Pittsburgh, would be paying no property taxes. As a homeowner in the city of Pittsburgh, those property taxes are really helpful to me. So, yeah, it would be simpler, but my income tax going up 40%, my sales tax going up more than 10% on more things. I mean, I think we have to do all the math and make sure that it's a good idea. If after you've done all the math, you're still convinced that it's a better idea, go for it.
Well, that's
Yeah, so as I said in my initial remarks, Dick Thornburg ran on a platform of getting rid of the school property tax as a way to get out from the unfairness. And it helped him get elected. And then he appointed a commission because he found out that the numbers didn't work. If you go to a state income tax and a state sales tax to finance local education without a local school property tax, then the problem that's going to occur is that the school board is going to have to depend entirely on the outstretched hand of the fist of the state legislature. Now, we are still in the midst of one of the worst debacles in the country of public education and universities not getting funded for over 9 months. So if you think you can be a state legislator, a state senator, and behave responsibly when everybody else couldn't agree on the time of day for 9 months, including the governor, God bless you. But if I were a local school board member, I'd hold on to something that I have control over, which is the millage, and hopefully a reasonably fair tax base. And the second point I'd make is, and getting back to the seniors problem, I just don't think it's right for people on retirement pay not to pay any income tax on their retirement, whereas virtually every other major state in the union, they do. So what you're doing is giving seniors an enormous loophole. And the governor was, I think, egregious in seeking those votes when he ran for election. Everybody's got to pay for local services. Everybody's got to pay for the education of their children and their grandchildren. That's what a civil society is. And not only am I worried that the numbers don't work, but I don't trust the largest legislature in the United States to behave in a rational fashion. We've got a governor right this moment who's distributing school aid money in an unconstitutional manner. He doesn't have the authority to do it. He vetoed the legislation and then started doling it out like Johnny Appleseed. It's been in the newspapers, and there's been some comment from the House and Senate that he's nuts. I think he's daring the House and the Senate to try to impeach him. So be very careful what you wish for, because you'll have school board members in your Senate office, if you get elected, demanding that you make good on what they could have collected from their own local tax. And they can't agree in Harrisburg on the time of day.
right. But Bill 70, none of you gentlemen have looked into the details of the Bill 76?
Yeah, I've looked into them. The numbers don't work. I'll just assert that.
Well, they did it with 7%. They were using that 7%. Somebody mentioned 10%. 10%, they would work a lot better.
No. I'm saying the increase in sales, when you go from 6 to 7%, that's 1 percentage point. But that's an increase of more than 10%. I mean, on what you pay on the taxes you pay on when you're spending $100, if you go from 6 to 7%, instead of paying like $100, instead of paying $6, you're spending $7. That's more than a 10% increase. It just is. So,
But that's a sacrifice. I mean,
yeah.
Some point we have to come to some shared sacrifice.
Well, if we're looking at, your property tax bill and your income tax bill and your state tax and the fact that the mall isn't paying property taxes anymore, it still looks good, go for it. I have not done that, so I can't say.
Jeff Weber, did
Okay,
you
if I
like
could, yeah, if I could just jump in. I have a little different, maybe, perspective on House Bill 76 than some of the other gentlemen here. The current prime sponsor of 76, Dave Arbo, Senator Dave Arbo, he is a friend of mine. I've helped with his campaigns in the past, and we did our PhD work together. His dissertation was on economic development, and a lot of his work and his concern for the issue came about from his study of economic development and what influences and factors, what influences economic development in the local area. So I can say that he is currently being the prime sponsor of this legislation out of his sincere belief that it's the right thing to do and that it's proper. Now, different versions of that act have been around for quite a while. There was a conservative caucus in the House that had a legislation similar to that. Representative Saylor was the sponsor of it. Senator Nicola, when he ran for governor, he had a similar plan that he was touting. So there have been different versions of it. And honestly, I go back and forth, because on the one hand, I look at the history and I say, we haven't gotten it right for 400 years. When are we going to get it right? But then there's another part of me that says one of the things that is really good in Pennsylvania, I try to be an optimist, just my nature. And one of the things that I think is really good in Pennsylvania is that we have a diversified tax structure where we're not solely dependent on any one particular source of revenue. And so when the economy goes in the toilet, our revenues stay pretty even keel. Yeah, and then likewise, when the economy's super good, our revenues stay pretty even keel. There's some states, Tennessee, they go swinging up and down with the economy in a wild fashion, and we don't. And so there's the one part of me that says, gee, we need to keep that diversified. We just have to make it so that school districts aren't dependent upon that sole revenue source. One of the things that occurred in the 90s was the senators and representatives were getting a lot of pressure for tax cuts. And so they ended up cutting a lot of the what's called Act 511 taxes. And when they cut those Act 511 taxes, that decreased the places that school districts could derive their revenue from. So they couldn't do an occupation tax anymore. There was a mechanical gains, a mechanical devices tax. There were all these assorted taxes that all of a sudden they couldn't, a per capita tax, they couldn't do anymore because the Senate and the House, and it got approved by Governor Ridge, repealed them all. And so then that gave them just the earned income tax, which had a cap rate, and the property tax. And so the dependency on it increased. And what we have to do, my current thinking, like I said, I go back and forth. I'll be honest with you, I go back and forth. But my current thinking is what we got to do is we got to go to regular, reoccurring reassessment. We got to consolidate the 6 laws for reassessment into one. We have to use the technology available so it's a transparent process like they're talking about. And we have to set an honest cap on the millage rate so that it's not more than a kind of general cap that is set in other states is 3% of a person's median income. And so they set it so that your property tax level doesn't surpass that. And have some sort of way to set all these different rates. But then that will also then require the state to help finance the local school districts. Because no matter how you slice it, as we all know, healthcare goes up, different parts go up. And so even if you're the most conservative school districts, you're still going to experience increase in costs. And you're going to have to meet those costs some way. But that's my current thinking, that's where I'm at, that yeah, we keep it, but we try to reform it to make it a more manageable, and make it in balance with the other taxes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for attending. I wanted to thank our panelists, Dr. Jeffrey Weber, Dr. Bob Strauss, Brian O'Neill. Also want to say thank you to Tony DiLoretto. He provided the food at our back table back there. Please sample it on the way out. Thank you all both. Thank you all for coming. And, keep an eye on the IUPSTJ website for more information about this event. Thank you for coming again. Good night.